McLeod. Welcome to Storm Politics. Thank you for watching today on WYLN TV, and a special hello to those watching online at WYLNTV.com. To open the show, I want to give a shout out to a young man I met last week who never misses an episode of Storm Politics and who follows all political talk, conservative and liberal, with a passion. Chad from Kel Airs, keep it up. Your commitment to understanding all sides of the issues at such a young age is a tremendous example to all of us. You're a great American. So last week I interviewed Republican candidate for Congress in the 17th District, Laureen Cummings. This week we'll hear from the other side of the aisle. Attorney Matt Cartwright, Democrat candidate for Congress in the 17th District, joins me on Storm Politics right after the break. Welcome back to Storm Politics. I am joined today by Matt Cartwright, candidate for Congress in the 17th Congressional District. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Well, thanks for having me, Tiffany.
I'm happy to have you, and really want to first start by saying congratulations on winning the primary. That was not an easy primary. You were up against an incumbent who's held office for a long time, and congratulations on winning the Democratic nomination.
Thank you very much. Tim Holden was a worthy opponent, and it was a steep hill to climb, but we climbed it and got over the top.
Okay, well, before we really start delving into the issues and your stances on the issues, I wanted to first have the audience get to know you a bit. So if you could tell us a bit about your background in the area, where you went to school, what you do for a living, etc.
Well, sure. I'm a lawyer. My wife Marion and I practice together. Her name is Marion Munley Cartwright, and our firm is Munley and Cartwright. We've done an awful lot of trial work over the years. I've been a trial lawyer for 26 years now. Mm-hmm. I went to Hamilton College, just up the road from where you went at Colgate.
I'm a Colgate grad, and right before the show you were telling me you played rugby for Hamilton.
I did. I played rugby for Hamilton, which is great fun, but I got hurt in the Colgate game. No hard feelings. Well,
I promise I will try not to hurt you today, even though you and I are from opposite sides of the aisle. We'll work well together today. There'll be no injuries. So, Matt, tell me, what made you decide to run for Congress? That's a big decision to make. What was it?
Well, as I said, I am a lawyer. After I got out of Hamilton, I went to the University of Pennsylvania for law school. Great school. And I worked for a big blue chip law firm in Philadelphia for a couple of years. Eventually got the offer we couldn't refuse, Marion and I did, to go work for her father's firm, which is now Munley and Cartwright. And I've spent happily the last 24, 25 years representing regular people from working families and the middle class in courtrooms, standing up to powerful interests, insurance companies, big corporations, people that people need lawyers to help stick up for them against. And I've enjoyed doing that work. And to answer your question, I always looked at a seat in Congress as an honorable position. I know there are those who have done dishonor to that position. True. I will not. But I always looked at it that way, and even more specifically, I look at it as a chance to help people from working families and the middle class on a much broader scale. With a seat in Congress. Was it a particular person who approached you, or a particular event that made you say, this is it, I'm running? Or has it been something that you've been thinking about over the series of years? It was something I was thinking about. No, it was quite the opposite of somebody saying, well, Matt, why don't you run? Because I'm 51 years old now, and when you're this long in the tooth, you look back over your time and you think, well, what took me so long to do this? And the answer is, you're sort of thinking about running for office, and you're sort of waiting for the stars to line up, or maybe even you're waiting for that person to call up and say, Matt, why don't you run for this? That call never came, and the truth is it isn't going to come for anybody. What I've found is that in politics, they don't hold the door open for you. You have to muscle your way in.
Absolutely. You are very correct about that. So as you've represented all these people in the area and as you've gone out and about on the trail, listening to constituents, what are you hearing are the top concerns of the people that you would be representing if elected?
Well, the number one concern is jobs. I mean, we just had, I read the Scranton Times this week, and it said northeastern Pennsylvania now has 9.6 unemployment rate. That's an embarrassment. It's an outrage, really. And it means that government's not working. What part of government's not working has yet to be seen. But, you know, I look at Congress, and Congress is dysfunctional. And it's not doing the things it should be doing. In my view, I think that to get the economy going, we have to do things like invest in the infrastructure.
Okay.
I'm very interested in, for example, the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee in Congress. I think we need to be looking at things like rebuilding our roads, our bridges, and investing in rail. Here we are, Tiffany, in northeastern Pennsylvania.
I know it drives me crazy about rail, too. I agree with you on that. That'd be nice.
Well, not only nice, but such a shot in the arm for our economy. Here we are in northeastern Pennsylvania, the home of the Steamtown Railway Museum. And if you're in Washington or New York or Baltimore or Philadelphia, to get there, if you're not going to drive there in a car, you have to take a bus.
But what about all that stimulus money that was intended to invest in our infrastructure?
Well, certainly some of it came this way in terms of what they called shovel-ready projects, roads and bridges. But I'm somewhat dissatisfied with that because that seemed like let's rush money into the economy, and it kind of went in helter-skelter in every which way. And I think what's important is that you do things in a systematic and well-thought-out way. So when we talk about the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, I want to go on that committee. I don't know that they'll have me, but I certainly have expressed interest in that, and I've taken some steps to try to get there. Back to rail, I mean, if we are a lot closer than people realize to getting rail service from northeastern Pennsylvania to New York City. Amtrak, I always thought Amtrak was against it, that the head of Amtrak was fighting against reestablishing rail service in New York City. They're not. They're all for it. Okay. It's just about rebuilding a certain stretch of track in western New Jersey. Once that gets done and once some stations get built, we can have rail service across northern Jersey to New York City. And you think about what a shot in the arm that would be for the economy, for real estate values. It means you'll have to listen to people with funny accents around here, but I think that's an easy trade to make.
Well, I'll be interested, we're going to have to go to break shortly, I'll be interested to find out after the break, in addition to investing in our infrastructure and looking at things such as rail, what else you would like to focus on if elected to Congress. We're going to take a quick break. We will be right back with Storm Politics. Welcome back to Storm Politics, joined today by Matt Cartwright, candidate for Congress in the 17th. Before the break, Matt, we were talking about what your priorities would be if elected. Working on infrastructure was one of them. What would be some of your other priorities?
Well, it kind of all roads lead to jobs for me.
Okay.
I mean, that is the number one priority for me, is improving the economy around here. I mentioned that there's 9.6 unemployment as a whole in northeastern Pennsylvania, but there are pockets where it's 14 and 15%. I mean, that's approaching Great Depression numbers.
How would you go about trying to improve the economy? What measures do you think need to be taken?
I don't think anybody disagrees with the proposition that we've got to bring manufacturing jobs back to the United States, back to northeastern Pennsylvania. And the way to do that, in my view, is to get tough with trade agreements. There's a lot of support for something they call free trade. And everybody understands that free trade is a great thing internationally, and it helps the world economy to have free trade. But there's free trade and then there's fair trade, which is free trade on an even playing field. And what I've been very concerned about is that we don't have fair trade with a lot of major trading partners, including China.
Okay.
Now let me give you an example of that. There's a friend of mine that owns a company, and it's not in the district, but it's down in Bucks County, Pennsylvania. And he and I are in an outdoors club, and he's very much an outdoorsman, and I am too. And I'm an environmentalist, and so is he. We're sitting down after a great day outdoors, and he says to me, Matt, pardon the vulgarity, but he said, Matt, the EPA is in my shorts. And I thought, oh, here we go. I'm going to get a lecture from a business owner about the EPA. But it wasn't quite that, and there was a wrinkle that I want to share with you. And that was this. He said, look, and he owns a company that makes rototillers and little garden tools, things like that. And of course, his competition is Chinese manufacturers that sell goods at Home Depot and the big box retailers, and that's fine. But he said, Matt, the EPA came in and made me do a $500,000 remediation that I really didn't think we needed. And he said, now look, I'm an environmentalist like you, Matt, and I complied with it because it was in order. But here's what I have to do. I have to add the price tag for that onto to the price of the goods that I sell. So when I'm competing against Chinese outfits that sell in the big boxes, my prices are higher because I've got to pay for these things. And I thought he's going to say we should abolish the EPA, but Tiffany, he didn't.
He's trying to say that we need to cut back on the excessive regulations being done.
Not even that. Not a little bit of that, but the main point he was trying to make was this: China doesn't have an EPA. China doesn't have OSHA. China doesn't have the Fair Labor Standards Act. China doesn't have all of the regulations that we've built up over the years here in this country, most of which, in my view, are good. But since they don't have them at all in China, they don't have safety, they don't have environment, they don't have labor laws.
It's hard to compete with it.
It's hard to compete, and the way you address that is not by abolishing our own well-thought-out regulations. It's by insisting that China play fair and that they price their goods accordingly. In other words, if there's a little bit of duty to put on the Chinese goods, otherwise what are they doing? They're dumping on our markets.
How do we do that? You're bringing up good points, and I don't disagree with a lot of what you're saying, but how do we do that when China, in essence, owns us? How do we tell them what to do when they own so much of us?
Well, that is a view I've heard a lot, and kind of the big picture on that is, you're right, China is heavily invested in the United States. But when you're heavily invested in a company or a place, you want that company or that place to succeed. And so it's all good for China if we do well. The better we do in this country and the lower our unemployment is, the better off China's going to be.
Okay. I want to ask you about some things that I had your opponent on my show this past week, and then of course I wanted to hear from both sides of the aisle. So,
sure.
But I would like you to be able to respond to some things that she said. She talked about the fact that, she said you're a progressive. And that, for example, there were two particular statements that you believe Obamacare didn't go far enough. Is that, in your mind, an accurate statement? And if so, how do you think it should have gone farther?
Obamacare is a euphemism, of course, for the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act. And it's something that American presidents have been trying to institute, starting with Theodore Roosevelt, to cover as many Americans as we possibly can. That is an accurate quote from me. It didn't go far enough, and here's what I meant by that, Tiffany. What we ended up with was a piece of legislation after a lot of wrangling. I mean, everybody here in this country witnessed the brawl that happened in Congress over the Affordable Care Act. And one of the things that they were talking about, you'll remember, was the public option. Now, the public option was this idea that we're going to have something like Medicare there to compete with the private insurance companies. And let me tell you what my concern was. My concern was that if you have the so-called public option available, it's there to keep the insurance companies honest. It's there to compete with the insurance companies and keep their prices at reasonable levels, because that was my concern, that we were kind of giving too much away to not only the insurance companies but also the big pharmaceutical companies as well.
Okay. Your opponent also says that you will want to limit ammunition purchases, and I'm just curious how, if that's true, and if so, in Pennsylvania, even though it is a heavy Democrat area that you'd represent, there's a lot of hunters as well. So how do you think that'll play out?
Yeah, it's funny how that came up. It actually came up in an odd way, because after that Aurora, Colorado shooting, it came up about assault rifles, and which was weird because that fella didn't use an assault rifle. An assault rifle is one where you hold down the trigger and it's just boom, 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 boom. That deranged shooter was pulling off a round with a trigger pull every round. What my opponent was referring to was we both got interviewed by one of the newspapers about that, and I am open to limitations on assault rifles, because that has nothing to do with hunting. I mean, if you try to take down an animal with an assault rifle, you destroy the animal.
Okay.
It's completely unnecessary to hunting. And
ammunition, which was one of the other statements?
Yeah, the reporter said, would you be open to ammunition purchase limits? And the answer is yes, because if somebody's buying 10,000 rounds, an individual, I mean, I can see if a hunting club or a gun club wants to do that, that's fine. But if it's an individual that wants 10,000 rounds at once, that's kind of a red flag, and you'd want some protections in place.
Okay, we're going to have to take a quick break. We will be right back with Storm Politics. Welcome back to Storm Politics. I'm going to ask you the same question I asked your opponent a week ago. Why do you believe you are more qualified to be a congressman in the 17th than your opponent is?
Okay, that's a fair question, and thanks for giving me equal time on that one. I want to start off by saying I am not going to say anything negative about my opponent. It was something that I went through in the primary. I tried to stay positive and upbeat and not go negative, and I think people are sick and tired of that. So you're not going to have me sitting here explaining to you why my opponent's no good. Okay. That's not going to happen. So the other half, the other half of that question is, well, what makes me think I'm qualified? And it goes back to what I've been doing my whole adult life, and it's been sticking up for regular people, middle class, working families. I understand these people because I've been fighting for them my whole life, and I'm very comfortable doing that. And it's not just me, it's my wife, Mary and Munley Cartwright. The two of us, we've been making this fight together our entire married life. We're proud to say we've been sticking up for the middle class together our whole professional lives.
How do you believe the top of the ticket is doing? If you were going to rate the performance of Obama Biden from starting with an A to an F, how would you rate them?
Well, it's going to be hard to give any part of government an A when we have 9.6% unemployment in northeastern Pennsylvania. Whose fault it is a different question, and I haven't quite wrapped my head around that one. I will say this though. I don't like the budget that the Romney and Ryan ticket came out with.
How come?
Because it cuts, and it cuts things that are vital to the middle class. For example, one of the things that it cuts that I can't believe is that the Romney-Ryan budget cuts veterans' benefits by 13%. There are so many people in northeastern Pennsylvania that depend on those benefits. There's so many veterans in our area, and to me, even to have that on your list of things to cut is wrong, because these are people that put their lives on the line for my freedom and your freedom, and to say that they should sacrifice 13%, that's the wrong way to go about balancing the budget.
Are you concerned about the current cuts to that this administration's making to Medicare? The $700+ billion worth of cuts?
Tiffany, I'm not, and I'll tell you why. That ties back into the discussion of the Affordable Care Act, because anything that was cut out of Medicare is dovetailed into the Affordable Care Act, so that people are not losing coverage for those things. What I'm particularly concerned about, though, is that under the Ryan plan, which is now the Romney-Ryan budget, they're talking about cuts to Medicare. They're talking about pushing eligibility ages up, and they're talking about cutting Medicare Part D, so that the donut hole is no longer closing under the Affordable Care Act. The donut hole closes by 2020. But even if you look as a whole at seniors getting Medicare and using that for health care services, the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office analyzed the Romney-Ryan plan, and it's going to cost every senior who is receiving health care about $6,400 a year out of their own pocket for their health care under what Romney and Ryan want to do to the Medicare system. And I looked at that, and 50% of the people receiving Medicare benefits make less than $22,000 a year. So not only is it wrong, the arithmetic doesn't add up. You can't balance the Medicare budget that way, because you're talking about money that isn't really there.
We only have a few seconds left. I wanted to make sure, if people would like to learn more about you, donate to your campaign, etc., where can they go to learn more?
Sure. We're on the internet at www.cartwrightcongress.com. It's Cartwright Congress. It's not Cartwright for Congress. Okay. CartwrightCongress.com.
And are you on Facebook as well?
We sure are.
Okay, terrific. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. Best of luck in the upcoming election. And remember, folks, if you look around and you don't like what you see, don't complain about it. You can do something about it. You can vote. Thank you for watching.